You know, today's one of those days. I've had a lot of false starts making this video, but this is the take. This is the great take. This is the take with the gold star. My name is Steve Guttenberg, and I am the audiophiliac, and today's show is all about the E.J. Jordan Marlow speaker. Now, it looks like a typical two-way stand mount speaker, right? But then, when you remove the grill, what do you see? You see a single driver. A full range driver, meaning there's no separate tweeter, there's no crossover. This one driver, this Jordan driver, covers all the frequencies from the bass to high treble, and that's it. So while it looks superficially like a coaxial driver like you'd see on a KEF LS50 Meta, or a concentric driver like on a ELAC Unify speaker. No, those have separate tweeters and crossovers, and the Marlow does not. So we're starting out with something very, very different. Now, the company was founded by Ted Jordan. He wrote his first paper on small, full-range drivers in the early 50s. I think he started selling small metal, full-range drivers in the 60s. I came across his drivers, modules, like they called them in those days, I think, in the 80s. So this company has a long history developing full-range driver design. And that counts for a lot because it's a very sophisticated, a very evolved product. Now, the driver itself, which is sold separately, it's called the Icon. It uses a 4-inch metal cone driver, and in the center is not a dust cap, but a phase plug. It is made up from UK-sourced parts assembled in Denmark and then returned back to the UK to be sold as raw drivers, as Icon drivers, or in Marlow speakers. The cabinet is a thin-wall Baltic birch ply. It's heavily damped on the interior of the speaker. Now, as you can see on the front panel, it is a ported design, and then round back, instead of the typical binding posts you see on pretty much everything, there are 4mm sockets that accept banana plugs. Oh, before I forget to mention it, yes, there will be an audiophiliac viewer system of the day at the conclusion of today's show. As for the prices, the driver itself, you can buy the Jordan driver, the Icon driver, for $774 a pair in the US, and the Marlow speaker is $2570 a pair. Warranty runs to 2 years. Oh, and the shipping, by the way, is free. My samples had a gorgeous walnut finish. It is also available for an upcharge in rosewood. I'm going to put up some of the specs right now, but the one that jumped out of the deck is frequency response, which is rated from 44 Hertz to 18K, okay, plus or minus 6 dB, which is a swing of 12 dB. That's a lot. Most speakers, the spec usually looks like plus or minus 3 dB or plus or minus 1.5 dB, or sometimes it doesn't give any tolerance at all. But this one does plus or minus 6, and that's a lot. So it's no surprise it doesn't sound, well, like a lot of other speakers. Now, I used, for a comparison later on in this review, the KEF LS50 Meta. And well, I'll talk about what the differences were between this speaker, the Jordan speaker, and the KEF soon enough. As I said earlier, the basic character of the sound is fast, clear, lively, energetic. Actually, quite a contrast to what I think of as the sound of the classic BBC-style LS358 type speaker, which are beautiful sounding speakers, but I wouldn't call them fast or nimble. But this one, the Marlow, absolutely is. For my listening sessions, I got hung up on Johnny Cash, this Live in Denmark 1971 CD, and also Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson doing a VH1 Storyteller. And the two of those giants on stage together is so cool. But it was the voices I was focusing on at first. The voices were just so present and immediate and like right there. Oh, and before I forget to mention it, I was listening fairly close to the Marlows. I was, I started further away, like 7-8 feet away, and it was like, I'm not so sure that this is working. So I moved my chair a little closer. I moved a little closer, and it was getting better and better. And I moved to as close as 3 feet away, and I thought the sound really close up, really near field, was its best. But I also moved back to about 5 or 6 feet away, and that was really good too. But this speaker is ideal for near field monitoring. The high frequencies were actually very clean, very crisp actually, even though it only goes to 18K. To me, it sounded crisp, clear, lively, and just full of detail. This is a high resolution design. Now the bass, considering it's a small box with a 4-inch driver, bass was surprisingly full and complete sounding. Again, nimble, clean, not boomy, certainly not thick. It was a very complete sounding speaker on its own. But as I continued, I'm looking out of the corner of my eye, and I was looking at the KEF LS50 Metas and saying, yeah, it's time to pop them in. And I spent some time, a good amount of time, comparing the two, the Marlow and the LS50 Metas. And they do not sound the same. The LS50 Meta is a fuller sounding speaker, a bigger sounding speaker, and they're about the same size. But it's a warmer presentation. Also, very, very resolving. But the tonal differences between the two were just jumped out of the deck. Going back to the LS50 Meta, I felt more at home with that sound. I enjoyed the Marlow for its liveliness, which was more so than the LS50 Meta, but the Meta just seemed, well, a better fit for me personally. But remember, in these reviews, it's not me saying this one is better. This is what I'm describing as the sounds that I'm hearing. You, of course, may have completely different tastes than me and have a different room and different everything else than me. So I'm just the reporter here. I am your faithful servant telling you what went down during the listening sessions. So for a female vocal, I turned to Rosanne Cash, her album, The River and the Thread. Now, before this album came out, like maybe a week or so before it came out, I went to a special press concert with Rosanne Cash and her husband alone on stage in a small club, and they sang this record together, sang and performed this record together. And I remember that Don Was, the president of Blue Note Records, it was on Blue Note Records, was there, and I had interviewed him earlier, and it was nice to see him, and it was just a great vibe. It was a great way to know a record. So she played the entire record and told stories about each song, and it was so intimate and such a beautiful memory. So when I play this record, which unfortunately you can't share the memory because you weren't there, but when I play the record, I just connect back to that time. And the songs just have this kind of mournful tone to them. I mean, they just sort of draw you in. She's such a good storyteller. You just feel her emotions coming through the speakers. That's what I got out of listening to this recording over the Marlow, is that time traveling aspect was phenomenal. For contrast, I'm into contrast, I next played the Flaming Lips do, so to speak, Dark Side of the Moon. Yes, that Dark Side of the Moon. And if you're a Pink Floyd fan and you just have a soft spot in your heart for Dark Side of the Moon, maybe you shouldn't listen to this record, because the band, the Lips, they just fold, tear, manipulate, mutilate this record. I think in really interesting ways. It just kind of pumps it up and frizzes out, and there's distortion and just playing with it. It is really, really good if you're not too reverent to the original, put it to you that way. And the imaging, that's the thing that the Marlows really excel at. Maybe because there's no crossover or single driver, coherent imaging is spectacular. It just like bursts out of the speaker. It's got depth, it's got space, it's just sort of it's pinpoint focusing. It's absolutely extraordinary in that regard. Really, really exceptional. Returning back to the LS50, which is no slouch because it's also sort of a point sound, it wasn't as good as the Marlow. I continued with Nirvana's Unplugged, live on MTV or whatever it was at the time. But it's such an intimate concert because it's not electric. It just has this closeness, this human quality with Kurt and the band. Is just, I love this one. I really, really do. It's definitely my favorite Nirvana recording. And Kurt Novalsek, as I say his name, the bass player, his bass sounded so good, so meaty, so real. But because I had just reviewed the Rel T0 subwoofer, this tiny little 6.5-inch subwoofer, I said, let me pop that in with these speakers. And you know what? Yeah, adding the Rel just completed the sound of the speaker. The Marlow just got bigger. It got bigger. It grew some cojones there with the sub mated to it. Of course, and that's hardly a surprise, right? It's a lot of small speakers can benefit from use with subwoofers, and I do not intend every time I review a small speaker to use a subwoofer with it, but it just so happened I had the sub just sitting there. I hooked it up, I listened, and I was really happy that I did, because as much as I like the speaker on its own, my estimation of what this speaker is capable of, with just a little bit coming in under the bottom. Remember, I'm not high passing, I'm not using bass management with the Marlow. No, the Marlow was running full range with the sub. So the sub is just kind of sneaked in underneath the Marlow. And that was a beautiful combination, truly seamless. I never detected the sub as the source of the bass, which is what I'm shooting for when I'm using subwoofers. Subwoofers, as I said in the Rel review, should be not seen and not heard. You should just be listening to the sound of the speakers. Your contributions, the sub, should be invisible. So now we're going to do, so Steve, what do you really think? I think the EJ Jordan Marlow speaker is not anything like, except in size, a BBC LS35A type speaker. And I say type because many companies have made LS35As. They will have a sound. It's an iconic sound. It is a classic sound. You can't get more classic than that. But this speaker is going in the opposite direction. I mean, LS35As, which I haven't had one here at home in forever. I mean, I know them, but not here, are more relaxed. They're a beautiful sounding speaker, a very musical sounding speaker, but not really for me, because they were a little too laid back and they sounded too small. This one, the Marlow, is more exciting. It's a more immediate sounding speaker, and I love it for that. I really, really do. That said, it's a little speaker. It has the limitations of any small box speaker with a 4-inch driver, or a 5-inch driver, or a 6-inch driver. They're all small. They cannot sound like big speakers, and this speaker never ever does. And it is, as I said earlier, at its best when listened to close up. Near field, midfield, meaning no further than 6 feet away or so, that's when I like them best. It's also terrific for problem rooms, meaning rooms with acoustic issues. And the closer you get to the speaker, well, this one or any other one, you get a higher ratio of direct sound relative to the reverberation within the room, the reflections in the room. So getting close to a speaker, pairs of speakers in problem rooms is always a good idea. And definitely that would be the case with this speaker. That's it. Now it is time for the Audiophiliac viewer system of the day. This one comes from Mike. He doesn't say where he lives, but anyway, thanks, Mike. And what really struck me about Mike's picture were the speakers. Those are Ohm acoustics, Super Sound Cylinder 4900. Now, they're cylinders. I've never seen a cylindrical Ohm speaker before. So anyway, this was a first. For the rest of the system, he's running a Rogue Sphinx V3 integrated amplifier. Turntable is a Regaplaner 3 with a Neo power supply. Cartridge is a Soundsmith Zephyr moving iron. Phono stage is Sutherland KC Vibe 2. DAC is handled by a Raspberry Pi streamer running Volumio. And the DAC itself is a Denafreps Aries 2. Rack is by Solid Steel. It's an S5-2. Anyway, thanks, Mike. Okay, we are back, and my name is Steve Guttenberg, and I am the Audiophiliac. Thank you so much for watching. Now, you can also listen. I have a podcast. It's called the Audiophiliac Podcast. So you can listen while you're driving or cooking or cleaning or doing all these other things where you can't actually be around a screen necessarily, right? And the shows on the podcast are not the same thing as these shows. They're originals. So I would urge you to check it out. Now, if you're not a podcast person and you don't do the app thing, I got you covered. I have my own website, which is called, well, I'll link to it below, but it's the Audiophiliac Podcast. And if you do podcasts, I wouldn't say it the old-fashioned way, but through, let's say, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, et cetera, the podcast appears on those outlets, and also iHeartRadio and Google Podcasts. They're sort of everywhere. So I would urge you strongly to check out the podcast. Now, if you really want to help support the show, I would urge you to check out my Patreon. It can be found at patreon.com/audiophiliac. I will link to that below, and we'll go there. I'm not going to explain the whole thing, but that's the best way to keep this show going. Coming up on 5 years. I can't believe it's going to be 5 years in August. Anyway, I hope you stick around for that. And of course, if you haven't yet subscribed to this show, please do so. And if you like the shows, hit that like button. I would so much appreciate it. My name, again, is Steve Guttenberg. This is the Audiophiliac Show. I was about to say daily show. Thank you for watching. And I really, really do hope to see you back here again very, very soon. Bye-bye.